campers and parents. We're excited to have you here with us this evening for Bedtime Stories with Bree. This is our first chapter of a book that is one of my personal favorites. This book is called Summer of the Monkeys. It's by Wilson Rawls. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he is also the author of Where the Red Fern Grows. Now, let me assure you that nothing sad is going to happen in this book. Parents who know that book may also remember that as a quite sad book. This one, however, is not. It is hilarious. It's a classic story about a boy in the Ozarks and a tree full of monkeys. It is funny, and I hope that you will join us. We're going to do a chapter each evening, and they will all be posted on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. So in case you miss a chapter, just go back and look each evening to see. We'll post around 8 p.m. and you can see the chapters of the book that you missed. But this is chapter 1. Up until I was 14 years old, no boy on earth could have been happier. I didn't have a worry in the world. In fact, I was beginning to think that it wasn't going to really be hard at all for me to grow up. But just when things were really looking good for me, something happened. I got mixed up with a bunch of monkeys, and all of my happiness flew right out the window. Those monkeys all but drove me out of my mind. If I had kept this monkey in trouble to myself, I don't think it would have amounted to much. But I got my grandpa mixed up in it, and I felt pretty bad about that because Grandpa was my pal, and all he was trying to do was help me. I even coaxed Rowdy, my old blue tick hound, into helping me with this monkey trouble. He came out of the mess worse than Grandpa and I did. Rowdy got so disgusted with me, monkeys, and everything in general, he wouldn't even come out from under the house when I called him. It was in the late 1800s, the best I can remember. Anyhow, at the time, we were living in a brand new country that had just been opened for settlement. The farm we lived on was called the Cherokee land because it was smack dab in the middle of the Cherokee Nation. It lay in a strip from the foothills of the Ozark Mountains to the banks of the Illinois River in northeastern Oklahoma. This was the last place in the world that anyone would expect to find a bunch of monkeys. I wasn't much bigger than a young possum when my mama and papa settled in that land, but after I grew up a little, Papa told me all about it, how he and Mama hadn't been married very long and were sharecropping in Missouri. They were unhappy too, because in those days, sharecropping was just about as bad as being a hog thief. Everybody looked down on you. Mama and Papa were young and proud, and I have people look down on them was about more than they could stand. They stayed to themselves mostly, keeping on sharecropping and saving every dollar they had, hoping that someday they would buy a farm of their own. Just when things were looking pretty good for Mama and Papa, something happened. Mama hauled off and had twins, my little sister Daisy and me. Papa said that I was the firstborn, and he had never seen a healthier boy. I was as pink as a sunburnt huckleberry and living as a young squirrel in a corn crib. It was different with Daisy, though. Somewhere along the line, something went wrong, and she was born with her right leg all twisted up. The doctor said there wasn't much wrong with Daisy's old leg. It had something to do with the muscles, leaders, and things like that all being tangled up. He said there were doctors in Oklahoma City that could take a crippled leg and straighten it right out as a ramrod. This would cost a little bit of money, though, and money that was one thing that Mama and Papa didn't have. Mama cried a lot in those days, and she prayed a lot too, but nothing seemed to do any good. It was bad enough to be stuck there on a sharecropper's farm, but to have a little daughter and a twisted up leg and not be able to do anything for her, it hurt worst of all. Then one day, right out of the clear blue, Mama got a letter from Grandpa. She read it until her face turned white as the bark on a sycamore tree. She sat right down in the dirt floor of our old sod house and started laughing and crying all at the same time. Papa said that was after he read the letter. It was all he could do to keep from bawling himself a little too. Grandpa and Grandma were living down in the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and they owned one of those old big country stores that had everything in it. Grandpa wasn't only a storekeeper, he was a trader too, and a good one. Papa always said that Grandpa was the only honest trader he ever knew, and he could trade with a terrapin out of his shell if he wanted to. In his letter, Grandpa told Mama and Papa that he had done some trading with a Cherokee Indian for 60 acres of virgin land, and that it was theirs if they wanted it. All they had to do was come down and make a farm out of it. They could pay him for it any way they wanted to. Well, the way Mama carried on, there wasn't but one thing that Papa could do. The next morning, before the rooster started crowing, he took the money that they had saved and headed for town. He bought a team of big red Missouri mules and a covered wagon. Then he bought a turning plow, some seed corn, a milk cow. This took about all the money that they had. It was way in the night when Papa got home. Mama hadn't even gone to bed yet. She had everything they owned packed and was ready to go. They were both so eager to get away from that sharecropping farm that they started loading the wagon by moonlight. The last thing Papa did was to make 2 baby cradles. He took Mama's old wash tub and tied a short piece of rope to each handle to give the cradle a little bit of bounce. And then he tied ropes to the 2 cultivator springs and hung the whole contraption to the bows inside the covered wagon. Mama thought that the old wash tub was the best baby cradle she had ever seen. She filled it and about half full of corn shucks and quilts, and then put Daisy and me down in it. After taking one last look at the sod house, Papa cracked the whip, and they left Missouri for the Oklahoma Territory. When Papa told me that part of the story, he laughed and said, "If anyone ever asks you how you got out of Missouri to the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, you just tell them that you rode out in a wash tub every inch of the way." The day they reached Grandpa's store, Papa was just about all in and had his mind set on sleeping in one of Grandma's feather beds. Mama wouldn't listen to all that kind of talk, though. She had waited a long time for a farm of her own, and she was bound and determined to spend the night on her own land. Grandma tried to talk some sense into Mama. She told her that the land was only 3 miles down the river, and it certainly wasn't going to go anywhere. They could stay all night with them, rest up, and go on the next day. Mama puffed like a setting hen in a hailstorm. Nothing Grandma and Grandpa said could change her mind. She told Papa that he could stay there if he wanted to, but she was going to take Daisy and me and go on by herself. Papa knew better than to open his mouth, because once Mama had made up her mind like that, she wouldn't have budged an inch from that spot. There wasn't but one thing he could do. He climbed back into the wagon, unwrapped the check lines from the brake, and said, "Giddy up." Those old Missouri mules started walking. It was twilight in the evening when Mama and Papa reached the land of their dreams. They camped for the night in a grove of tall white sycamores right on the bank of the Illinois River. Papa said that as long as he lived, he would never forget that night. It seemed to him that they were being welcomed by every living thing in those Cherokee bottoms. Whippoorwills were calling, the nighthawks were crying as they dipped and darted through the starlit sky. Bullfrogs and hoot owls were jarring the ground with their deep voices. Even the little speckled tree frogs and katydids and crickets were chirping with a nickel's worth of welcome music for those folks in those days. A big grinning Ozark moon crawled out of nowhere and seemed to say, "Hi, neighbor. I've been looking for you. It gets kind of lonesome out here. Welcome to the land of the Cherokee." Papa and Mama was so taken by the beauty she seemed hypnotized. She just stood there in the moonlight with a warm smile on her face, staring out over the river, her black eyes glowing like the black haws of the morning dew. Finally, she gave a deep sigh, and just as she had dropped everything heavy from her shoulders, Then spreading her arms wide, she said in a low voice, "It's the work of the Lord. It is what it is. Just think, all of this is ours, 60 whole acres of it." Papa said he was feeling good, that he felt as he could have walked right out onto the water of the river, just as Jesus had done when he walked on the waters of the sea. Mama was a little woman, barely tipping the scales at 100 pounds, but what she lacked in height and weight, she made up for in strength and spirit. Pulling her end of the crosscut saw and swinging the heavy blade of a double-bit axe, she helped Papa clear every bit of that land. Papa let Mama pick the spot for the log house, and it wasn't an easy chore for her. She walked over the 60 acres looking for the perfect spot. Finally, she found the very spot she wanted to put her foot down. It was the foothills overlooking the river bottoms in the mouth of the Blue Little Canyon. I grew up on that Cherokee farm, and I was about as wild as the gray squirrels in the sycamore trees, and as free as the red-tailed hawk that wheered over their cries of the Ozark skies. I had a dandy pocket knife, my darn good dog, and I was all a boy could hope for in those days. My little sister grew up too, but not quite like I did. It seemed as if her old leg of hers held her growing back a little. Each year it got a little worse, and the foot part kept twisting and twisting until finally she couldn't walk on it. That's when Papa made a crutch for her out of a red oak limb and with the fork on the end. The way Daisy could zip around on that old homemade crutch was something else, fast as lightning. She could get around on it just about as well as I could on my two straight legs. It was always a mystery to me to see how my little sister could be so happy, so full of life with an old twisted leg like that. She was always laughing and singing, hopping around on that old crutch, just as if she did not have a worry in the world. Her one big delight was getting me all riled up by poking fun at me. She never overlooked an opportunity, and it seemed that these opportunities came about every 15 minutes. Up on the hillside from our house, under a huge oak tree, Daisy had a playhouse. From early spring until late fall, practically all of her time was spent there. I didn't like to mess around Daisy's playhouse. Every time I went up there, I had a guilty feeling, like maybe I shouldn't be there. She had all kinds of girl stuff setting around, a corn shuck doll, a mud pie, and pretty bottles. She treasured every tin can that came into our house, and in each one, some kind of wildflowers were peeking out. At one end of the playhouse, Daisy had built a kind of little altar. She had made a cross by tying two grapevines together and covering them with tinfoil. The face of Christ was there too. Daisy had modeled it from red clay. For the eyes, she had pressed blue shells from the hatched-out robin egg into the soft clay, and she had covered the crown with moss to resemble hair. When Mama discovered the moss was actually growing in the soft clay, she told everyone in the hills about it. People came from miles to see the miracle of the moss growing in the clay. I had never seen anything like it. It was pretty around Daisy's playhouse, especially in the early spring when the dogwoods and red buds and mountain flowers were blooming. Warm little breezes would whisper down from the green, rugged hills, and the air would be full of sweet smells. It would make your nose tickle and burn. If you close your eyes and fill your lungs full of that sweet-smelling stuff, your head would get light as a hummingbird feather and feel as if it were going to sail away all by itself. Daisy was never alone in her playhouse. She had all kinds of friends. Big fat bunnies, red squirrels, chipmunks would come right up to her and eat out of her hand. She wouldn't be in her playhouse 5 minutes until all kinds of wild birds would come winging in through the mountains. They would sing and sit around the bushes and sing so happy and loud that the mountains would ring with their bird songs. Sometimes they would even light on her shoulders. I never could understand how my little sister made friends with the birds and the animals. I couldn't get within a mile of anything that had hair or feathers on it. Daisy said it was because I was a boy and I was catching all the things and bothering them all the time. One morning in the early spring, Papa came from doing the chores with an empty milk bucket in his hand. He looked a bit grouchy, and I didn't say anything except good morning. This was so unusual, and right away, Mama knew something was wrong. From the cook stove where she was fixing breakfast, Mama smiled and said, "Knowing how desperate you are to get the planting done, I'd say it was going to rain." "No," Papa said in a disgusted voice, "it's not going to rain. Sally Goodin's gone again." Sally Goodin was our crazy old milk cow. "Oh no," Mama explained, "not again." "I can't understand that old cow," Papa said, shaking his head. "Just last week I'd put an extra rail on the pasture fence. It didn't do any good though. She sailed over it as if it wasn't even there." Turning to me, Papa said, "J. Berry, you'll have to go find her. That's all there is to it. It's wild onion time, and if she gets a belly full of those things, her milk won't be any good for days. We can't do without milk and butter." When Papa asked me to do important things like that, it made me feel like I was about as big as those Ozark mountains around our log house. I puffed my chest out and said, "I'll find Sally Goodin, Papa. She's probably down at the river bottoms. That's where I usually find her." It seemed that Papa and I could never hold a man-to-man conversation without Mama getting all worked up, especially if we were talking about going down to the river bottoms. Mama frowned and said, "That crazy old cow anyhow. J. Berry, you be careful. I worry every time you go down to those river bottoms." "Worry?" I said. "Why, Mama? Why do you have to worry for? I've been all over those bottoms. You know that." "I know," said Mama, "but I worry just the same. It's no place for a 14-year-old boy. Why, that's a regular jungle down there. You can't see 10 feet in any direction. And there are snakes and wild hogs and goodness knows what all." "Ah, Mama," I said, "you make it sound like I was going to the jungles of Africa or something. I've chased Sally Goodin out of those bottoms 1,000 times, and nothing's happened yet. Besides, Rowdy's always with me, and he wouldn't let anything get within a mile of me." I didn't know it at the time, but about an hour later I wasn't so sure but what I was in Africa, the deepest part. Sally Goodin was one thing we had around our farm I thought was hardly worth putting up with. She always figured out she was a twin sister to the cow that jumped over the moon. She could stand flat-footed and jump out of a well. It seemed just as if I spent about half my time looking for her, and I figured my time was very valuable. We kept a bell on the old jumping thing, but that wouldn't do any good. Every time she heard me coming, she would get behind a bush and stand there as still as a fence post not to ring that bell. Sometimes I swore she held the bell in her mouth just to keep me from hearing it. I don't think I would ever have found her if it hadn't been for old Rowdy. He could sniff her out every time. Right after breakfast, I called Rowdy and we lit out for the bottoms to look for the Lee family's milking supplier. It didn't take Rowdy long to sniff out old Sally Goodin. She was down by an old slough that emptied into the river. It was cool and shady along those banks, and the slough, there was plenty of green grass, and she was just standing there under a big sycamore, chewing her cud, and looking as innocent as the day she was born. I was just about to warm up to her with the switch when an idea popped into my head. Looking at Rowdy, I said, "It's a cinch she's not going anywhere. Her milk bag is so full now, she'll have to walk spraddle-legged to get back to the house. Let's leave her alone for a while and do a little looking around while we're here." Rowdy's long, skinny tail started fanning the air back and forth. He whined and licked my hand. That was his way of saying, "If you want to do a little looking around, pal, that's all right with me." Now, if there ever was a place that needed looking into, it was the Cherokee river bottoms. A little jillion game trails twisted along their way through the jungles of wild cane and matted masses of elder. Like the crawl of a black snake, they would wind their way through the white tall sycamores, black gums, birches, and box elders. Every time I was drawn to the river bottoms, and I was doing a pretty good job of leaving my barefoot tracks in the dust of each and every one of those curving trails, and carving my initials in the smooth white bark of all the sycamore trees. In the cool silence of those Cherokee bottoms, I could find all the wonders of a storybook world. Sometimes I would pretend that I was Daniel Boone And then there would be the spells of Davy Crockett, Kit Carson, and the Last of the Mohicans, and Tarzan of the Apes. My favorite hero was Daniel Boone, with hawk feathers sticking out of the top of my straw hat and with my face painted with pokeberry juice, till I'm sure that I would have scared a hoot owl to death. I laid 10,000 Native Americans to rest in those sycamore heavens down in the river bottoms. Old Rowdy was always there. He was always in the lead, ever alert for any danger that might lie in my way. He could scent out a diamondback rattler or a copperhead long before I saw it. And let me tell you, he knew it was there. If there was any wild hogs around, he would scare the daylights out of them with his deep howling voice. Sometimes Rowdy would hop up on a sycamore log and raise his head high in the air and bawl. I always smiled when he did that because I knew what he was doing. That was his way of telling every living thing in those Cherokee bottoms to look out, for the mighty hunter and his blue-tick hound were on the prowl. I loved every bone in that old Rowdy's body, but what I liked about him most was that he always understood me. Sometimes I figured he could understand me even better than grown folks. At least he would never say no to anything I suggested. We were following a little game trail deep into the heart of the bottoms when all at once Rowdy stopped, raised his head in the air, standing as rigid as a black locust stump. With his long ears fanned open, he started sniffing the air, and I could tell by Rowdy's actions that he had scented something, but was having trouble locating it. Just then, a warm summer breeze came down from the hills and fanned its way through the tall timber of the bottoms. That was all it took for the sniffing old Rowdy to zero in. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. Rowdy looked at me and whined. "Get it, boy, get it," I said in a low voice. With no more noise than a shadow of a winged hawk, Rowdy turned and paddled from sight in a folding green abyss. Standing as still as the sycamores around me, I waited and listened. I didn't have to wait for long. The bell-like tones of my old dog's voice jarred the silence around me. He was bawling, he had treed, and his deep voice was telling me the whole world that he had something up a tree. To let Rowdy know that I was coming, I reared back and whooped just as loud as I could. "Hooey!" I tell him to the boy. "Sickin' boy, good old hound dog song." Ducking my head and running as fast as my legs would carry me, I started boring my way through that underbrush. Rowdy had something treed in a huge bur oak that was a solid mass of green. As I walked around the big tree, I peered into the dark foliage. I said, "What is it, boy? Is it a squirrel? What is it?" Not being able to see anything, I backed off to one side and picked up a stick and threw it up into the branches. From a shadow close to the tree trunk of the big tree, something moved out on a limb, but I couldn't see what it was until it walked out into an opening. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I just couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a monkey, an honest-to-goodness, real live, honest-to-God monkey. I was so surprised I couldn't move or say a word. All I could do was stand there, with my eyes bugging out the size of dinner plates, and stare at it with my jaw on the river bottom floor. The monkey was staring at me too, just as he sat there on a limb, boring holes through me with his bright little eyes. Then he opened his mouth like he was going to scream his head off, but he didn't make a sound. All he did was show me a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth. He looked so cute and funny, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Rowdy had seen the monkey too, and was having a hound dog fit. He was trying his best to climb that tree right up the trunk of the old bur oak tree. All the time, his voice was telling that monkey and the world it was the end of the road for that mammal. I didn't know whether the monkey got mad or scared. Anyhow, he reared up on his back hind legs and let out a cry. All around me, the bottoms came to life, with noises I had never heard before. Grunts and squeals and barks and cries and other things. I didn't get scared until I remembered that about the only place I could find wild monkeys was in the jungles somewhere. And that very thought of jungles brought up visions of all kinds of man-eating things like lions and tigers and gorillas. And then I got scared. My old heart started turning somersaults in my chest, and something that felt like a 1,000-legged centipede crawled its way up my spine. "Let's get out of here," I yelled to Rowdy, and tore down that game trail like a scalded cat. Any second, I expected something to jump out of the bushes and eat me. Old Rowdy could usually outrun me, but it was all he could do to stay up with me this time. I came tearing out of those river bottoms into one of our fields. At the far end, I saw Papa hitching up one of our mules to the corn planter. I headed for him, kicking up dust, with old Rowdy on my heels. About 5 feet from Papa, I threw on the brakes and said in a loud voice, "Papa, Rowdy treed a monkey." Papa just stood there for a second and looked at me, and he smiled back, and he said, "Jay Berry, when's a boy's growing up? It's all right for him to see things and tell fibs. But not now. I did myself, but you're getting to be pretty big and a pretty big boy now, and I think it's time you stop seeing things and telling fibs. Rowdy probably treed a squirrel." "No, Papa, he didn't," I almost shouted. "It wasn't a squirrel. It was an honest-to-goodness real live monkey. I saw it plain as day." Looking at me kind of hard, Papa said, "Now hold on a minute. I can't remember that you have ever actually seen a monkey before." "I haven't seen a live one, Papa, but I have seen pictures of them, and you remember that little thing Grandpa gave me a long time ago? That little thing that had 3 monkeys on it who couldn't see anything or hear anything or say anything? Well, that thing that Rowdy treed in that old bur oak tree looked just like that. And I'm sure it was a monkey, all right." I guess papas have a way of knowing when boys are telling the truth and when they're not. Papa frowned and looked off toward the bottoms. "Maybe you did see a monkey," he said, "but that's sure hard to believe. I've never heard of monkeys being around here." "Well, there's one here now, Papa," I said. "He's right down there in the river bottom, sitting up on a bur oak limb just as big as you please." Papa didn't even act like he heard what I said. He just stood there with a thoughtful look on his face, staring off at the bottoms. After what seemed like an hour to me, he chuckled and said, "Why, that explains it." "Sure, that's it. It has to be." "Explains what, Papa?" I asked. "That monkey," Papa said, still chuckling. "You know all those rich people that come up here from the summer to fish on the river? Well, the way I see it, one of them had a pet monkey, and it got away from him." I was just about to go along with what Papa had said when I remembered all of those strange noises that I had heard. "Papa," I said, "I believe there's something else down there. I heard a lot of different noises. Do you reckon that there could have been more than one monkey?" "Ah," Papa said, turning to pour the seed corn into the hopper of the planter. "You probably got scared and just thought you heard something. Besides, if there were monkeys all over this country, I couldn't do anything about it. I got corn to get planted. We can do anything without monkeys, but we can't do anything without bread and corn." I was aching all over to have Papa go with me to look for this monkey, but I knew it wouldn't do any good to ask him. He thought so much of that little old farm of ours, he wouldn't have stopped working to watch a herd of elephants march down the road. Just as Papa was putting the check lines over his shoulder, he said, "Oh, by the way, did you find Sally Goodin?" "Yes, sir, I did. She's down in that old slough. I guess when I saw the monkey, I got so excited I forgot all about her. I'm sorry. I'll go back and get her." Papa smiled and said, "No, now that I know where she is, I'll just go after her after a while. Your mother needs some things from the store, and I think she has a little job she wants you to do." "Yes, sir," I said, and started to trot off for the house. I didn't have the least bit of trouble getting Mama to believe my monkey story. She already believed those bottoms were full of things that will gobble you up. "Monkey," Mama said, looking all worried. "I don't doubt it. There could be anything down in those bottoms. Monkey? Why, I never heard tell of such a thing. I don't know. I just don't know." I saw right away that if I didn't say something to ease Mama's mind, she was liable to start laying down the law about me going into those bottoms. Oh, now, Mama, I can't see why you have to go and get all worked up like that just because I saw a monkey. Papa said it was probably a pet of some fisherman that got away from him. Jayberry, Mama said, your father doesn't know everything, but I hope he's right. I certainly do. All we need around here now are some lions and tigers and a few more wild things. We may as well be living in the jungles. I wish more people would move into this country. It's just not safe the way it is. Too wild and too untamed. To get Mama's mind off those wild things, I changed the conversation. Papa said you needed me to go to the store, I said. I do, Mama said, but I expect I'd get some paper to write things down that I want, so hold on. With that monkey running around in your head, you probably forget half the things I tell you I need. I waited while Mom got a pencil and paper and made a list of things she needed. Cramming the list down into my overall pocket, she said, now you hurry back from that store. I intend to set some hens today, and I need to put some fresh straw in those nests. I will, Mama, I said, and I bolted for the door. That's the end of chapter 1 of Summer of the Monkeys. Please join us next time as we see chapter 2. We'll be doing these videos every day. This is on about a 4th grade reading level, and it was written in the late 1800s. Some of the words are a little hard, and some of the phrasing is a little difficult for me to even read. But stick with us. I promise, Summer of the Monkeys is a hilarious book.